Hi and good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the Take for Market Rebellion on this Wednesday. It's a hump day, but it is a shorter week, so I'm not sure how we're going to play that out. But the reality was yesterday, really, the pressure was on. The pressure was on early, and the pressure just continued throughout the trading session. We did not see that last 45-minute move to the upside, sort of a bounce off of the lows. It's not exactly what we saw at all. As a matter of fact, you look over at the Dow, finished down over 600 points yesterday. Just an amazing move to the downside after hitting highs right around over 28,000, but that drop was significant, and that drop 632 points. So that's a significant move to the downside, but about 2%, not nearly as significant as what we were seeing out of the NASDAQ. And the pressure really was on technology stocks. That really was the focus, but it was across the board. Let's be honest. There was energy stocks. Everything was turned to the downside. And what we had been seeing, which was financials showing a little bit of strength, even with some weaknesses just last week, we were not seeing that. Financials were also participating to the downside. As a matter of fact, when you look over at the NASDAQ, and we were above 11,000, but that was around 2 o'clock, the selling in the final couple of hours really did finish things off. Finished down over 460 points. That's a 4% move to the downside. Pretty significant move. We talked about the 2% move, then we get a little over, call it a 4% move. Look over at the S&P 500. That was close to a 3% move to the downside, nearly triple digits, all of which closing, call it just about on the lows, all three of the major indexes. Crude oil really under pressure yesterday. That was off about 7%. We talked about some of the levels where crude just was trading and was seemingly holding on for a while in that low 40s area. Well, that's no longer the case as the stock sold, or the commodity sold off pretty significantly. And when you look at the Dow and you look at really what the highest level of pulling on the Dow was, it was absolutely technology. Take a look at Apple yesterday, Microsoft, Salesforce, all those names getting beaten to the downside, no doubt about it. But also throw in the financials, throw in some of those industrials. Boeing definitely taking a hit. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan again floating around that $100 level that we've been talking about for a while. It can get up and through it, but the sustainability to be able to hold over 100, and that's just been an area where I think it's been very, very important to keep an eye on. And as a matter of fact, this is a name that I do own stock in, JP Morgan. Actually, stock was just a little bit lower than where it is now, but they were buying calls. This goes back a couple of weeks ago. And so I just decided, you know what, once and for all, I'm going to own JP Morgan. I cleaned up a couple of other things, and now I'm going to be creating that into a buy right strategy. I will be selling calls against that until whenever. And also when I get that great dividend yield that we get out of that, and the combination with some of the nice premiums that we're getting, more so premiums than we normally would because of the implied volatilities that have been moving to the upside. Speaking of volatility yesterday in a really interesting range, and it makes some sense, obviously, with the move to the downside that we were talking about. The interesting thing, however, was despite the fact that we were closing near those lows, as I said, across all those major indices, the reality is on the highs of the day in the VIX, we were about 36, and that was very early on. Throughout the rest of the session, we just kind of stair-stepped a little bit lower. We actually closed near the lows on the volatility index, right around 3160. Well, the lows of the day were 30.5. The highs were around 36. So pretty amazing to see where that was. And maybe that was some of the indications coming into today as we're looking at a market that actually is performing to the upside on a relative basis, but nonetheless, a nice bounce, cutting some of those losses from yesterday significantly. Now, I did talk about energy. Energy really did struggle. When I look across at the OIH, those higher beta names in energy, wow. Look at the OIH down 6.5%. Many of those names finishing near the lows of the day. Marathon, Devon, Halliburton, all those names down 7% or more. And then you look at Apache and Diamondback and Oxy. You get the idea. A pounding across the board. Depending on where they were, didn't really matter in that energy space. They were absolutely selling. We did have a little bit of a bright spot yesterday. We had some of the airlines that were actually trading pretty well. Obviously, the autos as well. That news with GM and Nikola and all the rest of that really had a little bit of a spike and held on Ford as well. So that all played out pretty nicely. So we come off of this day, first day of the trading week. We had the long weekend, and it was brutal. The selling was brutal. Well, we walk in today, pretty nice rally off of those lows. And a matter of fact, when I first was looking, the S&P was up about 40 points in the pre-market, held on to that very early on. I was looking at the Dow up about 255. That was holding on pretty nice in the early markets. NASDAQ was up about 210. That wasn't holding it as well. As a matter of fact, early on, we were up about 185. Now, I'm taking a quick look, still up about 185 on the NASDAQ. So not as high as it was in the pre-market. However, I'm looking over at the Dow. The Dow is now running. The Dow's now up 350 points, and that's all just in a couple of minutes. As a matter of fact, we're only 30 minutes into the trading session. Volatility back under 30. So volatility is still telling us a little bit of something about what sort of nervousness there really is in the marketplace right now, and talking about some of those movements. And the S&P 500, we talk about a 32 in the S&P. That sort of should tell you about a 2% move on a daily basis for the S&P when you look at the VIX. Well, that's about what we're getting. We were a little bit more than that yesterday, and we did have that VIX that was up and towards that 36 level. It did come in towards the end of the day. There's no doubt about it. So it must have been sort of signaling to us a little bit of something about that there was a less nervousness than we were probably feeling yesterday. And now today we are seeing a pretty significant bounce across all these major indices. I'm looking at the S&P right now up about 46 points, or about 1.5, call it almost 1.5%. Really nice move. By the way, yesterday, again, 34 plus million contracts yesterday. And take a look at Apple. Apple, 2.9 million contracts trading in Apple, 1.7 million trading in Tesla. And then all of a sudden the big drop down. Nikola was actually number 3, and that traded about 480,000 contracts. So it gives you a little bit of a sense of those top 2 really making up a pretty decent percentage of all of the rest of all of the equity options. That really does make a pretty big statement. So what's really working for this morning? Well, it's the names that were not working yesterday. It's Apple, it's Microsoft, it's Salesforce. You got the XLK up more than 2%. You have Caterpillar, and you got Dow, and you got 3M. You look at the industrials, they're on the move to the upside, well over 1%. As a matter of fact, all the major indexes are moving not only to the upside right now, but you're also seeing a pretty great participation across the board from all the various sectors as well. So this isn't just technology. This isn't just industrials. It's not just financials. This is a broad swipe of movement to the upside right now up about 380 points. So if I look over at the NASDAQ, you got Tesla, you got Zoom, you've got NVIDIA, you've got Qualcomm, you've got Qorvo, you've got Skyworks, Apple, Activision, all kinds of different names that are working now, that are bouncing back off of yesterday's selling. You still have some weakness, though. Some of that weakness actually coming from a little bit of the strength from yesterday with the airlines. You've got casinos, you've got Lulu, you've got Tiffany, and Lulu is interesting. That was on an absolute sprint up towards 400, and it's been pulling back ever since. And that makes a little bit of sense. It's a name I love, obviously. I've talked about it for multiple years. I've been in this stock for a very long time, holding on to the stock, selling options against it when it's prudent, when they actually give the opportunity, when those implied volatilities are just ridiculously high and give you a little bit of room to sell something. So that's been a great performer. But the sprint that stock made from 300 to 400 and the velocity of that move, you don't expect to see that continue. Very much like what we were seeing in the last recent days, where we'd seen some of those names that had been on an absolute tear to the upside. Yes, they're going to get some days where they're going to pull back somewhat, and you're going to see that. And obviously Tesla comes to mind, Apple comes to mind, Zoom comes to mind, of very many of these names. And some of those names that I named do have the fundamentals to back it up. Some of them don't. And so that's something that absolutely has to come into when you're looking at these names and trying to discern which names probably are the most volatile with the most velocity. Certainly some of those names where they aren't really so much on the fundamentals as they are on the potential for the future. And that's always been the case. Speaking of which, unusual option activity for today, I'm going to hit you with some Zoom. And the reason this one really is interesting for me right now is we just talked about it. We've seen this big pullback, and now you look at Zoom, the 380 calls that expire Friday, September 11th, Friday, 5,000 of those were bought somewhere between $6 and $8. So Fairly high premium, really short time frame. Sounds like something we've been talking about for a matter of months now, but certainly this does play into something that's been very, very interesting. Will this stock be able to make that kind of a bounce? It was trading at 370 at the time of this trade, so that gives you a little perspective. Obviously, right now for me, it's only 30 minutes in the trading day, so whenever you're looking at, keep that in mind in terms of where the stock is, where some of these volatilities are, and all the rest of it. You've always got to be very, very safe, and you've got to obviously look into these things as much as you possibly can. Yesterday, we were talking about Nikola. That stock sprinted up and over 50 and then pulled back a little bit today. But that was on an absolute tear, and that was also very short term. We talk about discipline all the time. You've got to set your targets immediately, and that's something we do here at Market Rebellion all the time. That's what our educators talk about each and every day, each and every session that they have. They talk about discipline, having a plan, knowing what you're going to be doing. If the stock, if it's bought at a price, you already know what prices are going to sell on the good side and the bad side on when those exits are going to occur. But that's all part of the discipline that comes into play. So that's very, very important. Our guys at Market Rebellion and gals are some of the best, I think the best in the industry. Last thing for you. I got to hit on this. My wife would not let me sleep any longer under our roof if I didn't. Come please to the TwinCitiesLime.org site. It's going to be Saturday. We're going to have our virtual gala. If you go to the TwinCitiesLime.org, hit on the events page, and you'll be able to see it. There are already the live auction items there. As a matter of fact, Market Rebellion has one of those auction items up for auction, which should be really, really exciting. All kinds of great things, though, and I encourage you to take a look at that. Saturday from 7 to 8. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have some entertainment. We're going to have a lot of dialogue, of course, talking about Lyme disease and how awful it is. And it didn't stop just because COVID is here. And that's something that you really have to be very, very aware of. People are getting out probably more so than ever, which also exposes them that much more to ticks, which exposes them that much more to potential for Lyme disease. So that's something we're trying to help in any way, shape, or form, and not just awareness, but getting people to a proper diagnosis from a Lyme literate practitioner. So that's very, very important to us. My wife obviously is the founder of this whole thing, and I sit on the board. It's really important to us. We really think this is going to be great. I think we can raise a little bit of money that will help get more and more people to be seen and diagnosed as quickly as possible. That's going to be great. So TwinCitiesLime.org, then go to the events page and then scroll through some of those items. And then please stay tuned with us. As a matter of fact, Saturday night from 7 to 8, that's Central Time. And we'd really encourage you to do what you can in terms of donations. That really would be awesome. Folks, have a great day of trading.